All right, thank you so much. I see that there are some people that are starting to trickle in now. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're going to get started in just a few minutes. Just going to give it 1 or 2 minutes for folks to continue joining us, and then we'll get started. But thank you again so much for joining us. All right. And thank you again for joining us, everyone. We're going to get started in just 1 more minute. My name is Tony Richardson, and I'm with NEAF. And today you are in the webinar Honor Native Lands, a guide to Indigenous land acknowledgements. We are very happy to have some of our partners from the U.S. Department of Arts and Culture here with us. And as I said, we're going to get started in just about 1 more minute as folks continue to trickle in. But thank you again for joining us today. And we hope you guys are ready because we have got a wonderful webinar presentation planned for you. All right, so that is 2:02. We are 2 past the hour. We're going to go ahead and get started. Again, this is the webinar Honor Native Lands. This is co-hosted between the National Environmental Education Foundation, NEAF, and the U.S. Department of Arts and Culture. This webinar will be about an hour long, and you're going to hear from myself. You're going to hear a little bit about NEAF, and we have a wonderful presentation for you guys. Before we get started, though, my name is Tony Richardson. I am the Director of Public Lands Engagement for NEAF. My pronouns are he, him. And I also wanted to just take a few minutes to acknowledge that I understand that folks are coming here. Folks are coming with varying levels of understanding, and that's why we're all here today. We're all here today to learn. So just want to start out by saying that this is a really safe space. Feel free to share. Feel free to ask questions. There are no wrong questions, and we are all just here to learn. I would also like to say that I would also like to use this time to do a land acknowledgement. As we call this meeting to order, NEAF, the National Environmental Education Foundation, we are based in Washington, D.C. We acknowledge that the District of Columbia, Maryland, and Virginia are the traditional territories of the Nashatank, Acostan, and Piscataway people. With gratitude and honor for the generations who stewarded the land, we hope that today we inspire and learn from each other as we work and collaborate. I would also like to invite our audience members to, if you feel so inclined, if you feel comfortable, we invite you to type into the chat where you are joining from. If you would include where you are joining from, and then also if you would post a land acknowledgement in the chat. It can be here, just some quick tips right here for posting this in the chat, but we'll just allow 1 or 2 minutes for everyone to respond, or everyone that wants to respond. And if you are unfamiliar with this, or you're unfamiliar with how to find this information, as you can see, just get creative, think about what honor means to you, and don't worry, because you're going to learn everything today. You're going to learn tools, you're going to learn resources, and at the end of this webinar, you're definitely going to know how to post a land acknowledgement. So just 1 more minute, if folks could chime into the chat. As I said, type in where you are joining from, and then if you would also include a land acknowledgement of the indigenous communities that have historically been on the land and occupied the land that you are currently on. All right, and I see a few answers coming in. Thank you all so much for everyone that participated in that. So again, this is our webinar agenda. I'm going to give a brief introduction to the National Environmental Education Foundation, provide an overview of National Public Lands Day, provide an overview of the Indigenous Land Acknowledgement Guide that we've put together, and then we're going to have a wonderful presentation from the U.S. Department of Arts and Culture's Honor Native Land team. NEEF. So the National Environmental Education Foundation, we were directly chartered in 1990. We are nonpartisan and non-advocacy, and we are charged with advancing environmental literacy nationwide. As a foundation, one thing that we do really well is facilitate public-private partnerships in support of environmental education, health and wellness, and public lands engagement. I think National Public Lands Day is a wonderful example of a public-private partnership. We receive funding on the public side from federal agencies. We receive funding on the private side from companies such as Toyota Motor North America, and we are able to sort of have even better impacts and engage even more people by sort of bringing together both those private and public sectors. Some of our guiding statements, I won't read through all of these, but our mission, NEEF's mission, is to make the environment more accessible, relatable, relevant, and connected to the daily lives of all Americans. NEEF also has a commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion. Again, I'm not going to read through everything that's on this slide, but definitely want to focus in on NEEF's external DE&I goals. As you can see right here in the middle, our external goal is to create opportunities for people with varied perspectives and identities to experience and learn about the environment in ways that improve their lives and the health of the planet. And I think that today's webinar is a really, really great, just highlights this external diversity, equity, and inclusion goal. We are so fortunate to have truly experts from the field here with us today as our guest speakers, and we are really happy to sort of bring this knowledge and bring this information to our National Public Lands Day audience. So again, just wanted to reiterate that beyond sort of environmental literacy, NEEF also has a commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I think that this webinar is a really great example of us sort of being at the intersection of both the environment as well as diversity, equity, and inclusion. NEEF has 3 areas of focus: K through 12 environmental education, health and wellness, and public lands engagement. Again, I am the program director for public lands engagement. Within that focus area, that includes our conservation focused grants as well as National Public Lands Day. I have the pleasure of helping to coordinate the annual National Public Lands Day celebration. This will be my 4th National Public Lands Day. National Public Lands Day will be happening in just a few days. It is the 25th of this month. It's always the 4th Saturday in September, and this year we'll be celebrating the 28th annual National Public Lands Day. So National Public Lands Day is the largest single-day volunteer effort for America's public lands. NEEF is the national coordinator for NPLD. Each year, hundreds of thousands of volunteers come together to assist with various projects designed to restore and enhance public parks, forests, waterways, and more. NPLD provides volunteers of all ages and abilities the opportunity to roll up their sleeves and work side by side to care for public lands. Through NPLD, NEEF works to connect people to public lands in their communities, inspire environmental stewardship, and encourage the use of public lands for education, recreation, and general health and wellness. The annual NPLD celebration is also a fee-free entrance day for the National Park and other federally managed public lands. In 2021, NPLD is one of only 6 fee-free days. So even more incentive for folks to get out and enjoy one of the many activities that happen on National Public Lands Day. So over the last few weeks, I've had the opportunity to work with the U.S. Department of Arts and Culture, their Honor Native Land team. And together we have worked on a guide for Indigenous land acknowledgements for events. running National Public Lands Day, we understand that there was a need for this. Over the years, site managers have reached out to me and they've said, hey, Tony, I'm really interested in this, but I need to know more. I'd like to do something, but I need to know more. So we are very, very happy to have partnered with them to put together this guide. We will drop a link to the guide. It is on the NEAF website. It is available for free, and it walks you through all of the basics of sort of what is an Indigenous land acknowledgement, what are the keys to doing it in a genuine way, how can you go about sort of implementing it into this year's National Public Lands Day. But again, this guide is really sort of a starting place, not an ending place. We think it's a really, really great start. There's actionable items in there. But again, we're happy today to have the actual experts here to talk to you all. And they're going to be talking about the guide that we've worked on together, as well as some steps that you can take to go beyond that guide. So without further ado, I will pass the presentation over to the Honor Native Land team from the U.S. Department of Arts and Culture.
Hey, thank you so much, Tony. It's so exciting to be with you all today. And my name is Jacqueline Russell. I am the Director of Decolonized Futures and Radical Dreams at the U.S. Department of Arts and Culture. And my pronouns are she, hers, asa. And I'm connecting from the lands of the Tamayama people, which is in north central New Mexico. And I'm so grateful for these lands because they've taught me how to be a mother. They've taught me how to be a better, more earth-focused entrepreneur. I've learned so much. I've grown so much. And so just have so much gratitude for the medicine of this place. And I am really excited to introduce and share the stage with Amelia Winger Bearskin, who is my collaborator and co-creator at the USDAC, as well as our rad and fabulous co-director, Bree. You guys want to just say hello before we jump in and get started?
Hey y'all, it's so wonderful to be in space and share space with folks who are committed to learning and being in process always, and we're happy to be here.
Hello, Nyaweskano. I'm Seneca Cayuga Nation of Oklahoma Deer Clan, and just so happy to be here and to be on the stage with people I respect so much. It's been a pleasure getting to know you, Tony, as well, and I'm so happy to be here with Jacqueline and Bree.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much. And our first kind of just like warm up is really a mentee question. I know that we've been living in Zoom land for a long time, but we at the USDAC want to just acknowledge that even Zoom land is Native land. And we are going to do, Nicole, who is the fabulous tech guru helping us, we're going to do a little mentee questionnaire, just warm up. So be honest, like, was what you dropped into the chat your first land acknowledgement? We have one option, which is the really incredible rapper extraordinaire MIA, who I love. She's kind of brushing her shoulders off in this really awesome like flex, right? And underneath her, the comment is, nah, I'm kind of a pro. Well, I'm a pro, kind of. We have Lisa Simpson, who's doing her amazing like moves, her hip action. I've given one before, if that's you. And then we have the actor John Krasinski from The Office kind of doing this like shrug of like, yes. This was my first one, and I'm not sure I got it right? So it's a fun way to build curiosity, to create some just like synergy, and to like do a temperature check of like what we're feeling. How I see that most people have given one before, and that was definitely like evident like in the chat. Like there are a lot of people who are naming multiple tribes and nations that like you, whose lands like you live on and work from. So that's like amazing and incredible, great start. And so we hope that we can build on some of those skills. So I'm going to switch over to the slides and just want to make sure that are folks able to see this? Okay, cool. So really at the USDAC, like we have in 2016, we launched an amazing toolkit to talk about the importance of land acknowledgement. And now we're in this great phase of dreaming and building about what it looks like to move from land acknowledgement to action. But I think like in that process, I can bet that of the 61 participants like on this call, we've all been in a space, whether in IRL or Zoom land, that we have collectively experienced like a cringe moment of like, that wasn't a great land acknowledgement, or what is more likely to have occurred is that there was never any acknowledgement at all that occurred before the start of an event. And that can include like a public event, a conference, it can even be meetings, right? So we think about all the ways that we gather. And, you know, we hope at the USDAC that we can propel folks and incite people to action, that there's a way to be able to include land acknowledgements in all the work that we're doing. What's important to recognize about land acknowledgement is that they are an incredible way to really shift the narrative, to change perspective, and to allow us to move and work from a place of real truth telling, of acknowledgement of like where we are across Turtle Island. And Turtle Island is a phrase that is relating to what we know in English as like North America. And so I think about, you know, the question, or want you all to reflect on it, like what does it actually mean to give honor, respect, to pay love to the place we live, work, and make meaning? You'll notice that in my acknowledgement in the beginning, like my place of living in this current moment is actually my partner's homeland. I live in so-called New Mexico, and I really believe that these lands taught me and are teaching me like how to be a mother, because that is the phase that I stepped into, the transformation that I am living out. And so I really want to bring my reverence for this place, my honor and my love for this place into my land acknowledgement. So it was a little bit different from the land acknowledgement that Tony gave in the beginning, right? Like you can see one that was a little bit more of an opening, and then mine, which is a little more personal. If you haven't already, and Nicole has dropped into the chat the link to our really comprehensive distilled toolkit that NIEF and us like co-created. So you'll see that flag up and fly up into the chat over and over again. But really a land acknowledgement is a way for us to pay respects to place. And what's really important about understanding land acknowledgements is that it's a counter to settler colonialism. And so I think that most folks maybe have heard this term, but you know, to work from a place of just greater understanding and a foundation, I think we'll spend a little bit of time of just like talking about like what is that? The goal of settler colonialism is the removal and erasure of Indigenous peoples in order to take the land for use by settlers in perpetuity. Historically, this has meant that involve the committing of genocide by murdering Indigenous people. It has also historically and contemporary means that ignoring of treaty rights that Indigenous peoples hold. So it can be outright, you know, ignoring them. It can be broken treaties. So there are promises that are undelivered by the federal government. And what I think is most critical in understanding settler colonialism is that it's ongoing. It is occurring today. And oftentimes we tend to think about, there's a tendency to think about settler colonialism as an event and not actually like as a structure of ongoing oppression. It's important to recognize that the United States could not exist without its settler colonial foundation, because settler colonialism at its core is the continued dispossession of Indigenous people from the lands that we steward. And it's important to recognize this, particularly in this moment that we're in now, where we're really reckoning or really trying to call attention to the need to reckon with the realities of climate change, understanding that as Indigenous people, we steward over 80% of the Earth's biodiversity, which means that our traditional ways of knowing are the ways of knowing that are very much in conversation and fluency, in really able to help us navigate these times and periods, because we know these lands and have lived in these lands for long periods of time, since time immemorial. And that knowledge is something that continues through governmental structures, colonial borders, colonial realities, settler colonialism as its own structure of oppression, continue to separate Indigenous people from these places that we know and called home. What is also really important to connect when making a land acknowledgement is that you're actually participating in an act of decolonization. Decolonization is a way of working in the world, and it can happen in every facet of our life, right? When we think about how ever-present colonization is across the world, it's a global occurrence. Decolonization as a lens, we can relate to 3 different actions. The first is truth-telling. We are, by naming the act of that these lands, even though Indigenous people may not have reservations or relationships in a structured way, through the act of giving land acknowledgement, we are acknowledging and honoring the fact that there has always been a connection there and that there will always be a connection there. So this is an act of truth-telling. Through decolonization, we also encourage collaboration. You could say that the USDAC, the partnership of the Honor Native Land Project, which is stewarded at this time by 2 Indigenous women, in collaboration with NEAF and National Public Lands Day, is an example of integrating Indigenous perspectives, Indigenous ways of knowing into the act of this practice and educating others. The action of decolonization as a tool in centering Indigenous perspectives is also a way that the work of decolonization happens. So we can see that through offering land acknowledgement at a meeting, at whether that's town hall, whether that's a community gathering or a family dinner, that there is an action of distorting the power dynamics that colonial powers have always, maybe not always, but have continued to dispossess and move us forward. And so this work comes from Ho-Chunk scholar, Dr. Amy Lonetree. So I encourage you to look her up. And this art piece is by Kathleen Wall, which is also this superhero Tewa woman who is fighting and defending the earth, which is in defending it from the black snake. So this commentary on the need for shutting down at this particular moment. When she made this was the Standing Rock Keystone XL pipeline. So why does this matter? Why is it important? Well, one of the things that for some folks, this knowledge and education around settler colonialism might be new. We are in this continual place of demanding action to try to create cracks in consciousness. And oftentimes in this work, around educating others about Indigenous people, our history, Indigenous sovereignty, we're sometimes faced with just the very honest reaction from folks around, well, I didn't know Indigenous people were still in existence. I didn't know that you were still here. I hear that very frequently, especially as we're moving into the fall, where some of my least favorite public holidays are occurring. So like to think about the falsehood of like Thanksgiving and the challenges around kind of educating people in different moments of time, like around Native American Heritage Month. And you know, there's a lot of discussion about, well, why is this? And we think about the realities like of our education system. Settler colonialism, as I mentioned before, is ongoing. And the dispossession of land from Native peoples is ongoing, but that's very deliberate. In our public education systems, like there is not an accurate depiction of the history, like of Turtle Island, of this place. We don't have inclusion of Indigenous narratives. And so what exists very easily in the consciousness of a lot of American citizens, particularly in this country, is the falsehood of the Indian from the past. So it's very stoic. In Indian, these are 2 kind of screenshots of Google image searches. When you search for Native Americans, you'll notice a couple things, that they're mostly Plains Indians. So it's very stereotypical monolith of Native people. There are very few contemporary images. Almost all of these are black and white. Even some of these are the paintings, right? So this very romantic view, this very lone Indigenous men wearing headdresses. And so this plays into this occurrence and this idea of this single image of Native people. And so it's very, when we think about, well, what is the impact of that? We can see it. 27 states across our country make no mention of a single Native American in the K through 12 curriculum. There are only 3 states in our country that actually have comprehensive K through 12 Native American history. 87% state history standards don't mention Native American history after 1900. So there's a consistent break in the knowledge that we require students to know. And so we begin to see how easy it is for these monoliths and these stereotypes of Native people and the reality that Native people don't exist anymore for those to happen, right? Other notes from Illuminatives, which is a really incredible resource, Native American characters range from 0 to 0.04 on primetime television and popular films. And if we think about the popular culture images that we have, they also play into those same stereotypes that are perpetrated like in that Google image search, right? So it's very wise, very stoic, Indian. And there are some new shows that are beginning to like counter that narrative that are literally being made right now. And yet we're still having to deal with the realities of this. Like Native American women face murder rates at 10 times the national average, and 1 in 3 Native women will face violence in their lifetimes. Like these are the realities of the times that we're living, the impacts of settler colonialism. And it's really important to note that as we're moving through how this relates to our session today, is that by separating and dispossessing Native people, we're creating this pervasiveness of invisibility and erasure, right? So we are not acknowledging that Native people existed. We are not acknowledging that they have relationship to the lands that actually still span and are so powerful that they can't necessarily be diminished by settler colonialism, but yet there are realities that are created because of it. This particular quote is one that I want to read just because I think it's helpful for folks to understand, to see some of the connections, and that is invisibility as a modern form of racism against Native people. We're taught that racism occurs when a group of people is seen as different as other. We are not taught that racism occurs when a group of people is not seen at all. Yet research shows that the lack of exposure to realistic, contemporary, and humanizing portrayals of Native people creates a deep and stubborn unconscious bias in the non-Native mind. Rooted in this unconscious bias is the idea that Native people are not real or even human. And so we get to this particular place of seeing the way that these structures of oppression, the need for telling and integrating Indigenous people are really, we're primed to take action in this moment. So how do we begin to build a counter narrative? And some of these questions can move from, it really comes down to collaboration. Relationships and mutuality and kinship are very much embedded into the infrastructure of Native people and Native cultures. The idea of the phrase like all my relations from a lot of our Lakota and Dakota relatives in the plains comes from this idea of being responsible to each other. And my community in the Navajo Nation is another philosophy of relationality and collaboration. And so when we are able to work from these places of relationship and kinship, we can actually build stronger narratives that actually break the bounds of settler colonialism and put us into connection to each other. Other examples is really reflection. So many of you have noted that you have already made land acknowledgements. You've done so in the chat today. And so it's really about like, and we're going to get into this discussion together as a team about like, how do we continuously question and call in our work and practices so that we ensure we are in service of Indigenous communities. how do we move from acknowledgement to action? And I think that there's a way for all of us to do that, particularly those who are joining today on the call, right, around this movement to engage with native land. Like engagement in public land is engagement in native land, right? And that so much of our time and our movement forward can really be from building our own curiosity. It was noted in the chat that Tony, or not in the chat, but in the presentation that Tony noted on the slide, there was a bullet point that said, be creative. And this is something that is like, I really like try to encourage people to build their curiosity around, like, how can you use your interest? I'm super into art. I think that art can change the world. And I love introducing people to particular artists in homeland communities that I visit that I happen to be aware of. So if I'm in like Kumeyaay lands in what is known today as San Diego, I'm like always talking at Tommy Pico, who is an incredible Kumeyaay poet. If I'm in different other homelands and I'm like, oh, you should really connect with this person's work. That these are all ways of really trying to adapt our practices and build an understanding around the people who've had generations of connections to the places that we travel and know. I think that there's opportunity for us to challenge organizations to think about permanent land acknowledgements at your office, but permanent in that we're committed to the practice, not permanent that 5 years from now you're saying the same words that you start in 2021, right? So it's really thinking about how are we in relationship with the practice of land acknowledgement, knowing that at certain points of time, we're going to integrate different people's work, and we'll talk about that. The other part of this is really instituting the practice in all the different organizations that we're a part of. Maybe you're a part of a theater group or a running group or a biking group. How can you all mobilize within those ways? If you're gathering for a hike or conservation around particular wetlands or different engagement, like how are you then thinking about and doing work around, oh, there's this really awesome group of like Indigenous community organizers, like I think we should all donate $5 for and in honor of like the native land that we're working on, right? There are really creative ways to like think through these, think through land acknowledgement as a practice that we want to be in relationship with, not necessarily an action that we just do at the beginning of a meeting. And so I'm gonna stop screen share really quick and let me navigate this. And I'm going to welcome team members onto the call and also switch sides because we have another mentee question. But I'm curious, Amelia and Bree, if there are things that I forgot or you wanted to add on since we're kind of in this place of like learning together.
First, I would love to say thank you to everyone in the chat. I've been having so much fun listening to you, Jacqueline, and then watching the land acknowledgements as they've come in. So it's just a really beautiful thing to see how connected we are through, these Zoom platforms are not it would be so much more fun if we're in the room with you and we're hanging out in all your different places, but this way we get to see people who are in so many different lands. So thank you for your engagement and activity. And Jacqueline, that was just such a beautiful, this is my first time hearing it, and it was just so moving and funny. If something isn't funny, I will definitely stop paying attention. I'm terrible. I have like no attention ability at all. So it was just really beautiful. And it touched my heart. So thank you.
Oh, thank you. That means so much. And for context, for people listening, like Amelia is new to our team. So we're like super excited to be like sharing space and even Zoom space together in time. So it's really exciting to just have this opportunity for me to be together.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Something came to mind, Jacqueline, when you were, and forgive me, if you can pull up those last two questions once more, because they were so important to this space. And I feel like I took some notes so that we can kind of deep dive, and I'd love to hear folks' feelings in the chat as well about this. One of the things I was thinking about as we went to the settler colonialism slide was around, this macro of how do we move from the acknowledgement to the action, knowing what we know, the political education that we've taught thus far, thinking about these frameworks, what else do we need to analyze? And I came across, the manifestations of white supremacy culture. One of them is individualism, right? This takes us away from the work of liberation, which is collective action, right? This is all of our responsibilities to be able to uplift narratives of Indigenous folks. This is, and quite frankly, it's non-Native folks' responsibility to be able to create the space and the container for us to be having these conversations, right? Because Indigenous folks know this information. This is actually information that, we should be sharing amongst each other. And it brings me to just, the lens in which I do my work through healing justice and community accountability. We have to find a point of connection above all, right? And calling in our own work and our own practices relies on our ability to analyze what we do and how we do it, right? So if we're asking ourselves questions around taking accountability, right? How have I alienated or invisibilized Indigenous cultures in my neighborhood, right? And without judgment, not from a lens of judgment of oneself, but a lens of curiosity and saying, what have I done and what haven't I done? When have I scapegoated other identities to share my own trauma, right? And share the truth about what happened to me and my own people. And as a Black American, I can point to many times in my political education where I've mistakenly boxed Native and Indigenous cultures in and not allowed, all of our humanities to be present for, a conversation, and really just wanted my own trauma and the own histories of my own people to be heard, but not creating space for a collective response. I'd love to hear from other folks in the chat or the duration of this conversation. Just how are y'all calling in your work and making sure that you're in service to all communities?
That was so beautiful, Bree. And I want to give space for people to respond. And I also have a question for Jacqueline, for Bree, for Tony, and for the audience, which is, I often get a lot of calls from people asking for help to do land acknowledgements, which is amazing because I'm in the exact right place to give them the links and give them all this wonderful education. And I wonder, what are some of the things that have stopped people, like when they've tried to do it themselves and they felt, stopped or blocked? And maybe since we're here live with you today, we're not going to give you the answer because there are, as we told you, as you've seen this wonderful presentation, that there are processes, but maybe we can hold space today and each of us, give at least some solidarity and some ideas and brainstorm a little bit. I see Susan Hall says, stopping comes from feeling like I will do it wrong and offend people. I really hear you.
I'll also say, just to add on to it, thank you so much, Susan and Savannah, what y'all have offered. I think building off of that, the vulnerability of this question, right? I can share a personal narrative. I think in the past, what has stopped me from being able to openly acknowledge and call for Indigenous sovereignty is being steeped, right, in the narratives of Black Americans and not seeing any kind of intersectional overlap, right, amongst our communities and how we are organizing to build power. I think in the past it has been very, I've viewed our oppression as very us versus them. And now a little later in my career, I'm realizing that for that container to even exist hinges on white supremacy culture, right? The fact that we have to consistently have this conversation and break down the us versus them. Well, it was built up to maintain power and control in the hands of white folks, right? So this is actually a conversation about how can we shift our care framework And when I think about just the basics of what it means to care about people, how do I shift my care framework from I meaning I, me, my family, the Black community, and turn it to we, meaning all oppressed and marginalized communities under white supremacy culture, right? And when we have to recognize that when harm occurs, it impacts not just the one or two people that are involved, but the entire community that those people represent and the generations that come after them, from what we know about ancestral trauma.
I think one of the things that like I think have heard, and even myself, like as an Indigenous person, like I only have my lived experience like as a Diné person to lean on and to be guided from, right? And so I too am in places in the times when we like traveled, like the before times, right? Where I'm like, I don't know how to say this name and there's nobody here to tell me how, right? And so I have to give myself grace. Like I depend on prayer and prayer to like my, to who we call on for guidance as a Diné person, and just like ask for like grace, like ask for that grace to be able to say like, I'm saying this in a respectful way and don't mean disrespect. And really as a way to talk to like my perfectionist like parts that like I carry into a place, which is, you know, also connected to like the culture, to the society, and has its own baggage connected to like white supremacy of like having to get it right, and the pressure that I feel sometimes to be the only person of color in a room stepping into a place where it's like that's fraught with its own dynamics too. But point being is that I have to arm myself with what I need, and that is prayer, like before I'm giving a talk, and being able to name, like, I'm saying this in the most respectful way. Maybe I'm not saying it right, but I don't mean disrespect, right? And even if that's just to myself and to those that I'm talking to, right? Like that's the way that I try to move through those feelings. Instead of just stopping, instead of just saying like, okay, I'm not going to do it, I'm going to scrap it, like and choosing not to. And so I think that I hear that from other people, like, I don't want to get it wrong. I think what's beautiful is when we look at land acknowledgement as a practice, as a relationship that we want to build, then it allows us to move from this place of grace, to move from a place of curiosity, and a way for us to learn publicly, which is a term that my Indigenous sister, Dr. Adrienne King names in her blog, Native Appropriations. And so it really is this idea of committing to the way that we process, like we're going to process out publicly, whether that's on social media, whether it's on Twitter, whether it's a blog, right? Whether that's in delivering a land acknowledgement, a commitment to this greater idea of how to be in right relationship, and moving with that good intention at heart allows us to be in that practice of learning publicly, learning with other people. And I think that that's an offering, and an offering that is not prescriptive, right? Because this is not prescriptive work. And I also encourage people when they're looking at, and we'll drop a resource for those that aren't unfamiliar with the website nativeland.ca. There's oftentimes like you'll see this overlap, this beautiful matrix and mosaic of like Indigenous nations whose lands the individual is on. And a question I always get is like, there are 6 different nations where I live, which one do I need to say? And my question is like, all of them. Like if you're going to move in right relationship, the beautiful thing about land is it doesn't know, right? It doesn't know, I mean, it knows, but like it doesn't know borders. It doesn't know those delineations. Like you can't see where those places are. And the reason why those overlaps exist is because maybe there are pecan groves that everybody picked from, like in the lands that you were on. Maybe there were just a massive amount of like aspens that people continued to use to harvest like materials. Like that's why those overlaps exist, because of the biodiversity and the wisdom of that particular place, right? And so those things are really important. Like when we think about the why, like why does it matter to then name 6 people or 6 nations, right, that come from those particular places? Well, it's because like those relationships and the medicine and the power of that place is so significant that you had so many different relatives and relationships and nations that had relationships to that area. And that's powerful. That's what we need to call on. That's what this moment in time like requires and needs.
That is so beautiful, Jacqueline. I recently was in a meeting with someone who pulled up that same map, and it was I think that map is so beautiful. And my sister does a lot of work for the USGS and making maps of water systems with APIs. As an Indigenous woman, it's very fun to watch. And in this meeting, the person asked me where my land was, and I showed him, and he says, "No, that says that's Mohawk land." And I thought that's very interesting to me, that in that moment I started thinking about maps, right? And how like if we look and I asked him then to go on a Google search. I said, "Can you search, the name of my tribe and see what you find on Google?" And then I asked him, "Do you think that there's more information from what you found on Google than what might be from 20 or 60 Haudenosaunee people you might talk to, and then why there may be differences, like what kind of information ends up online, what kind of information is in Wikipedia articles, and who are the people that primarily write those?" And we kind of walked through information and why I may think that my land is somewhere that isn't represented in a map. And actually Mohawk is just part of my Six Nation Iroquois Haudenosaunee people of the Longhouse. So actually, that it was just kind of like a misunderstanding, right? So what advice can we give to people like that when there is information that you look at online and it may differ from what the lived experience of an Indigenous person may say? How do we approach that? And maybe people in the chat too could talk about some ways that they're approaching that, because we might be in an era where walking through information has become difficult for everyone in almost every part of our lives, right? So, but I just want to say, that what you said, Jacqueline, was so beautiful about giving yourself grace, and maybe maybe we can talk through a little bit about that, about why only looking at one source of information, like the official Wikipedia, the official state, may not be more important than looking at what an Indigenous person says about that land. Like maybe we can talk a little bit about that, because in the past that might be how we found true information, correct?
I think this is such a beautiful question and full of so many nuances, right? And I think that one of the things that is really important to hold, like I, across the board, like am such a proponent of giving hat tips, of like citing folks, like especially when the sources and the people that you are naming like are Black, Indigenous, and people of color, right? I can relate this to on a micro level of like living in my community on the Navajo Nation, which is where I grew up. There are practices like our lands span 3 different states in the Four Corners region of the Southwest. And where my parents live, they are 2 communities that are 13 miles apart, so in the same relative area. But one of the things that would always happen anytime we needed a prayer done or a ceremony done was to decide whose family we were going to listen to, right? And it would be such a headache, quite frankly, to navigate this, like with my mom's side saying that we need to do a particular practice, and then my dad's side saying, no, this is how we do it. And sometimes that related to like moon cycles, like, no, it doesn't happen on a full moon, it happens on a new moon. It doesn't happen in this time, it happens in that time. Like, no, you wait till the 5th day and the 5th morning. And it's like, it was so frustrating. However, that reality of like lived experience of choosing a path of being able to say like, okay, like this particular prayer we are going to do, and we're going to follow mom's practices of the moon, like, and that's how we're going to navigate this. I think that one of the things that taught me was relating it to where am I learning from, right? So like, how am I then, when somebody questions, well, why are you following that particular practice? I said, well, this is coming from my mom's side, and they say that it's important to follow this particular prayer during a new moon time, and so we're going to hold it that way. So relating that to like this work of like social and racial justice, of being able to say like, well, I really value this practice. I have a friend who works in what is so-called Toronto, and she learned as part of her land acknowledgement from an Indigenous person how to offer tobacco to people whom she was going to invite to give land acknowledgements when they came to the museum that they worked with, and they were a non-Indigenous Asian person. And so that was the way that she began to learn. And so when she came to me, she said, this is how I learned how to offer tobacco from this particular elder who lives in this region of the world. And that's how I know how to give this practice as part of the protocol of this particular place, right? And so I think sometimes like it's more work, it's more words, right? But it relates to the citation that get lost when we're referencing Wikipedias, when we're referencing different like tribal like websites. And so I think sometimes it's being able to name, like I read this in, Roxanne Dunbar Ortiz's book, Indigenous Peoples' History, about this. And so that way you can always name like the scholar, the place, and that brings those realities like to life. I always think that if you're in relationship with somebody, and that relationship can be extensive, it can also be you listen to somebody's talk or you follow somebody on Instagram, like then you name them, like that's knowledge that can be like that's important to cite, right? I'm right now taking a writing workshop with an Indigenous poet, and it's literally an hour once a week. But she shares like different people's work. And last night she was talking about how I just want you all to know that these two people will be getting paid from me and part of our workshop fee will go to paying people. It was digital videos of content that existed, right? But she was paying the Indigenous folks that she was inviting into our digital space, even though they weren't there. They might have been watching like Reservation Dogs like back home, but like they had videos that were showing in our workshop. And she was like naming that she was going to pay them using our workshop fees to honor their creativity and their story, right? And I think that there are beautiful ways of like how provenance and like citation and like bringing in like the relationship with real people that we know, or weaving in like the knowledge that we know that like can make it like factual, like making that like living history something important for everyone to know.
That was beautiful, Jacqueline. Thank you for that. Thank you for that narrative, the stories. What y'all are gaining here is magic. Really happy to be a part of it. I was thinking, I read the chat and wanted to respond directly to Nicole, who wrote things that were really important and I feel like would be shared, thoughts that would be shared probably by other folks on the call, which is that I worry that I'll look performative or come across as disingenuous doing a land acknowledgement, right? Nicole offered that they've given a few land acknowledgements at the start of large events, but sometimes it feels inadequate, like it's words without action. And I know that this has been a way that I felt in the past, just learning, right? As a beginner, just learning how to do a land acknowledgement. And what I would offer to that and to many things is that it's not performative if you make it a consistent practice, right? That's not just done at large events, right? But that's done at small events, done in your home, done before something that is ritual for you, that you do. The acknowledgement of the land that you're on doesn't have to be performative given if we've done the homework, right? Did we do, this is college, right? Did we do the reading for class, right? Did we acknowledge that we're in a consistent practice to learn about what white supremacy culture has been hiding, right, from us, information that we've needed that works for the collective? How do we learn also how to be active students in a field, right? As opposed to what some of us would be experts in some fields, right? We've got to acknowledge that making something a practice and making it not performative means also being okay with making mistakes, right? And that's a piece of that learning out loud that Jacqueline was framing for us. And then I also would offer, just lastly, where else in your life have you instituted a new thing and had anxiety around it, right? How did you move through that? Because that at the basis of, you know, that question, what I'm hearing is there being an anxiety to get it right, an anxiety to not hurt people. And we have examples from our lives, our deep histories, that already can serve to support us in moving through that question.
I have another question for the audience. And maybe you all the panelists have answer as well. Have you ever reached out to an Indigenous person to help you with a land acknowledgement and they have been like, no, and you wondered why, or they were like, I'm not doing this, and they gave you an answer that didn't make sense? Has that happened to anyone? I don't know. I don't know, Savannah, if you were saying yes to me. I saw that you say yes in the chat. Oh, you were. Okay. Thank you for clarifying that. Well, I guess the reason I say that is because, you know, a lot of us do get a lot of requests for this, especially around Indigenous Peoples Month. And so I'm sure that we all understand capacity and things like that, but there might be other reasons at play too. And I would love to know what people think about that. In general, me and Jacqueline like to joke sometimes around like what is and isn't our job. And we like make these funny skits. I'm not going to make you do it right now, Jack. We go and make these like little skits of like practicing, you know, kind of practicing saying no to things that we don't want to do, or being funny about it as a way of like, you know, it's better to laugh than cry, you know? And so I don't know if anyone else has experienced that. But I always want to, like, whenever I'm in a platform with 63 people, be like, when I say no, it's a joy. It's an opportunity for you to do something beautiful. And I can't do it for you because you'll miss out. You will miss out. But I don't know if anyone else has any thoughts on that.
Oh, I love that, Amelia. And well, you know that I say no a lot to land acknowledgements because I want this to be shared work. So even if like I'm on like a conference panel, I refuse, like as the Indigenous person, even if I'm working with like other like relatives, like from like POC folks, like I am like, no, like I would really love it if like it wasn't on me to do this work. And that's always meant with like openness. So I think that that's something that like I like practice. And then there are times when like I say yes, where like giving a land acknowledgement is part of like my greater keynote presentation, right? Or like a different type of training that I'm giving. And so like that to me is like, it's actionable for the other folks, like to see it as a way, and it's right. Like I want and really try to practice like in our family to be in relationship with the place that we're in, and that we call home, or even when we go to other places, like in the times before, we would travel as a family, and like we would always you know, go with my partner and our baby to like pray to like the lands that we're on, like thank you for coming, for the lessons of this place, and just having a conversation with the land. I think that's something that's been really beautiful. I'm reading the chat.
And I was going to say, I'm sorry, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but we are in our last minute here. I know
Oh,
we're having
thank
so
you.
much fun and hearing from you guys and great questions from the audience, but maybe if you guys wanted to answer this last one, and then I think that we will have to wrap it up here. And then we'll have some quick announcements at the end, but if you guys want to answer this.
Yeah, I'm gonna fold in two answers. And Amelia we can tag team. The question about the unceded that popped up of saying like, yes, absolutely all native lands are unceded, even if treated, right? And to your point, like that's in the language, like there are particular tribes who like really demand and require that be explicit, like in their paying homage to them, right? So I think it's important to just do some research about like how are other individuals in the place that you live, like in relationship with the land, or like making declarations about the land, which is something like from living in Kumeyaay land, like that is very explicitly like unceded Kumeyaay lands, and you'll see that everywhere. I think to the point about the tensions, I think that when you look across this country, there are always tensions, whether visible to you or not, between settlers and Indigenous people. And that really the way forward is through through both decolonized methods of like practicing truth telling, like how are you beginning to like truth tell and name those, like there's been harm here, this is why, and this is how we can begin to like create relationship with each other. It's not just about building the relationship, but it's about cultivating relationships. And so it's longer work. Like there's no prescriptive way for me to share with you. And Amelia, I'm curious if you want to add anything before we close.
Oh, thank you so much. Well, I just saw someone put a question in the chat. Is there a preferred term, tribe or nation? And that's going to be specific to the people you're talking about. I am the Seneca Cayuga Nation, but then there are other parts of my same tribe that will say a different word. So it will be specific to your region and to the people that you're talking about.
I'm curious, or if Nicole can just drop in as we're closing. We have our last like Menti question, which is like, what are you inspired to weave into your next land acknowledgement? Is there an upcoming gathering that you want to share? So if you want to drop that into the chat, drop that into the Menti, and then we would love to have that feedback just to cheer you on virtually too. So thank you so much for this wonderful invitation. Yes, the Menti. Yep, that's it.
Excellent. Yeah, so that chat just got dropped in the link, and so you guys can go ahead and fill that out. Thank you so much again for joining us. An amazing presentation today. I told you guys you were in for something special today. Thank you again to the Honor Native Land team, the entire team from the U.S. Department of Arts and Culture. If you did not get a chance to ask your question, I will also drop my email address in the chat. Feel free to reach out to me and I can connect you. I can ask that question for you and I can make sure that you get an answer to your question if you had a question we're able to if we ran out of time on you. But again, we're now a few minutes over, so it's pretty soon. I think the Zoom is going to kick us out. This webinar will also be recorded. The recording will be made available on the NEAF website and on our social media. We'll get links out, and everyone who attended the webinar today or even registered for the webinar will receive an email with a link to that recording so that you can share it. But yeah, thank you guys again. Today has been fantastic, and I think as people begin to exit the room, maybe we can get the Menti up if we have some responses to that. Menti? Maybe not. Oh, perfect. There we go. All right, excellent. So yeah, go ahead and keep writing in if you'd like, and we'll be sure to also keep all of these answers in Menti so that we can go back through and look at all of these. But again, I want to thank you guys for joining us on behalf of NEAF and the U.S. Department of Arts and Culture, and thank you guys so much again for joining.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.